Hello, everybody. This is Steve Bennett of the Bennett Collection and the Bennett Prize. My guest today is Patrick Moore. Patrick is the director of the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, the Andy Warhol Museum, a museum that features the work of one of the most important artists in the history of the United States. And Patrick has graciously agreed to be a judge for the 2021 iteration of the Bennett Prize, and he's agreed to come today and chat with us about all and sundry things. Patrick, how are you? It's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm here and healthy and well in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and fall has arrived and I'm feeling happy.
Wonderful. And I gather it is football weather in Pittsburgh?
It is, but I am the least likely person to give you accurate information about sporting events, Steve.
Well, I have to admit, that's probably true for me also, although I do confess that I occasionally watch a football game. And as you know, I went to Notre Dame, so I'm almost forced to do it against my better judgment.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the Steelers won on Sunday, but that's about as far as I'm going to go.
Well, so you can be sort of like I am when you go to the water cooler or the lunchroom. You can say, "How about them Steelers?"
That is exactly the conversation that happens at the Andy Warhol Museum.
How about them Steelers? And you've discharged your duty. You've discharged your duty.
Yeah.
So you have graciously agreed to be a juror, and I'm assuming that one of the focuses of our audience, the foci, is who you are and what you're about. So why don't you take a minute and tell us about yourself?
Sure. Well, as you said, I am the director of the Andy Warhol Museum, and I'm honored to be a juror, and I thank you for all of the support the Bennett Collection has given the Warhol. I sort of grew up in the art world after going to Carnegie Mellon. I moved to New York City in the 1980s and thought that I was going to be a theater director, and then found that I didn't have that much interest in the theater. But what I did have interest in was the sort of performance art scene in downtown New York. And I worked at an organization called The Kitchen, which is a sort of storied performance art venue. And it was much more aligned with the art world than with theater. And I found my community, I found my place. And New York and the art world were very small, actually, in the 1980s. And I loved this feeling of community in New York City. It was a terrible time, too, because of the AIDS crisis. But even with that, you could kind of get your hands around the art world and feel like you were a part of it. So I worked there until I ran away to Los Angeles for no particularly good reason. And other than it was January and warm in LA, and lived there for 15 years or so, and ended up working at Yahoo, weirdly enough, and being a producer before I moved back to Pittsburgh and remembered that I'd worked in the art world and that Andy Warhol was my favorite artist. So it was kind of a full circle for me, but an odd little interlude in the middle.
So when you got to Pittsburgh and said, "Hey, you know, art's my thing, Andy Warhol's my favorite artist," you said, why not work in the Warhol Museum, I guess, huh? Was that kind of how it happened?
It did, in a way. I actually went to an event. There was an event that the Warhol produced that was at our sister organization, the Carnegie Museum of Art. And there's a grand old historic hall there called the Carnegie Music Hall, as opposed to Carnegie Hall in New York.
Okay.
And, you know, it's red velvet and carving. And then there were all these young people. There were guys with beards and, you know, people who looked like they could be in New York or LA, and the combination of that kind of historic space and this youthful energy let me know that the Warhol was onto something that I kind of wanted to be a part of. And I found it very charming and very interesting. So soon after that, I pursued the Warhol.
That's very interesting, and it's a wonderful way to begin. As you think about the Bennett Prize, as a juror, you know a little about it, you know what we're about. Give us some of your thoughts about realism, in as much as it's certainly the doc and I would be of the view that Andy Warhol, although he's a pop realist, he truly is someone who makes commentary on and art that contains realism. So I'd be interested in some of your thoughts about realism and what you're going to bring to the process.
Well, first of all, thanks to you and Elaine for establishing the prize, because sometimes I think about it and I'm like, hold up, are we still in a space where women are underrepresented in the art world? And of course we are. But it's shocking on a continuing basis that that's where we are in 2020. And in terms of realism and portraiture, which I think I would kind of focus on, my husband and I collect, and we tend to collect portraits. In fact, I told him the other day we had too many portraits. I said, this is like a hall of mirrors or something walking through here. So we've moved on to a little bit more abstract work, but there is something about the gaze, the act of looking into another person's eyes through art, that is continuously powerful and moving. And when I started working at the Warhol, I think that Andy's portrait work from the 1970s and 80s had been so sort of dismissed in a way that it overshadowed the fact that his work as a portraitist started from the very earliest work that he did, really. So those great Marilyn Monroe and Liz Taylor images that were ripped from the headlines, they were a kind of portraiture that was incredibly dark and revealing and moving to me. And it helped me then see the later work in a different way. So I'm surrounded by portraits every day, as you guys well know, because you're very generous. We have a show up right now called Femme Touch, which looks at women, the influence of women and feminine figures in Warhol's life and art. And it's a cavalcade of powerful female figures that sort of wind their way through the museum. So I don't know if that's a kind of coherent answer, but that combination of the fact that women, I think women reclaim their power in terms of the art world through portraiture and realism sometimes, because women don't have the luxury anymore of letting other people represent their bodies. They do it well and do it better themselves.
Well, I think certainly there is a truth to that. I think there's another feature to it, and that is we've always taken the view that women see themselves and they see reality differently than men do. Mm-hmm. And they bring a different sensibility to the artistic process. And part of what we're trying to do with the Bennett Prize is enable women to propel their careers and to celebrate the unique vision they have in ways that big art, institutional art hasn't permitted. And so we look at the second iteration of the Bennett Prize as a chance to do that. Do you have any expectations or thoughts about what's coming?
No, I think that there will probably be a really wide range of work because artists are all very, very individual. And, if I think of some of the artists that I admire who work in this arena, starting with the goddess Marilyn Minter, um,
Indeed.
I'm interested to see if the women who submit work remain interested in that sort of self-objectification that Marilyn embeds in her work. It's a fascinating process that she goes through. The paintings are very physically beautiful, but they are also really kind of emotionally brutal at the same time.
Very much.
So I'm kind of interested to see what the emotional tone of the work is, especially right now, because it's a time of trauma in our culture and in our society. So it'll be really fascinating to see what women are painting and how they're painting it.
I think so. You do you invite artists to come to the Warhol from time to time and exhibit there, although the collection itself is solely the work of Andy's, as I would understand it. Do you want to offer any advice to contestants, artists, ladies, as they consider their entries and the decision to compete?
I can tell you what I admire in artists that we show at the Warhol, which is an authenticity and an ability to convey emotion through painting. And with portraiture, that is certainly a hallmark. I think that while there are beautiful realist paintings that I admire, some of them seem very distant to me. And the paintings and the work that capture my attention are very emotionally present. And that can be done in many, many ways. But I think that for any artist, whether they're female or male, to work as an artist is to be your authentic self, whatever that might be. And that's a really steep challenge, but I think that that's what art is about.
It's brutal, actually. It's a brutal challenge. I don't think anyone disagrees with you. The process of making art is a continual process of confronting yourself. And on the subject, we've asked this question of everyone on this. I think you've answered it in some ways on the subject of visual versus narrative. There's a continuum. Actually, it's not even a continuum. There are two curves that cross. And one of the questions we frequently get from contestants is, should I do narrative work or should I do visual work? And everybody answers the question differently. What do you think?
I don't think it matters. I think that if you have it as an artist, if you have that magic spark, it doesn't really matter what the focus is, because especially artists who have a wide-ranging career, there is a through line that's a little bit hard to put your finger on, but they have imbued that canvas with some kind of magic. I am a person who believes that an artist's work is better enjoyed through knowing the narrative of their life and their biography. Certainly that's how we present Warhol. We present the collection in a chronological fashion. So there are many, many artists, and I think that this is particularly true of, women who were working when I came to New York. Kiki Smith, for example, or Nan Golden, not painters, but really amazing artists.
Fabulous photographer.
They're their work doesn't exist without their life and their story. And I think that it is so seamlessly embedded that all of that just mixes together, and it's not even a question for the artist about what they're going to make. It's driven by some place in them that is so deep and so real.
I agree with that. So your parting message to the artists and contestants is?
Keep making art. Sometimes a prize or an exhibition or a competition or an opportunity is a great impetus to make more, to make different. But we know that the life of an artist is a hard life, and that there are few skyrockets to success. And it's much more about being persistent and continuing to churn out that work until you find an audience and you find people who are supporting you and reacting well to your work. So that's my only sage advice, is don't give up and keep making art.
That's fabulous advice. And I think on that note, we're going to leave it there. Keep making art, ladies. Keep in mind that the deadline, if that's the right word, the closing of the call for entries for the Bennett Prize 2021 will be on October 16th. The information can be found at www.thebennettprize.org, and we invite you to go there and take the steps necessary to compete. We are grateful for your interest, and we look forward to reviewing your submissions. Patrick, thank you very much for being with us today. I can only say I'm deeply appreciative of your involvement, and we're very much looking forward to getting together to conduct the judging in the coming weeks.
It's an honor, and thank you for everything you do, Steve.
All right, thank you very much.